Hello and welcome to this Actor Thomas video. Now this, like I said last week, is the start of a new series, and in this series we'll be talking about characters from comic books, be it Marvel or DC, about their histories in the comic universe. So here goes. This first episode we're going to be talking about Professor Charles Frances Xavier, or better known to me and you by Professor X. Now, Professor X was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1963, appearing in X-Men issue number 1. Now, a rundown of Professor Xavier. Charles Xavier was born to a noted scientist called Dr. Brian Xavier and his wife Sharon, and they lived in a mansion in Westchester, New York. And being a very world-famous scientist, he has had many discoveries and many scientific experiments noted to him. Over his years of work, he worked with a fellow scientist called, a noted scientist called Kurt Marco, who also had a son called Kane. And over the years, the families would entertain each other. Unfortunately, one day Brian was killed in a science experiment that goes wrong. After a period of severe grieving from Sharon and Charles, Kurt and Kane start muscling in on the Xaviers, and Kurt announces that he loves Sharon and that he wants to marry her. But unfortunately it soon discovers that Kurt has a number of issues, and one of the main issues that he can't deal with is the fact that in some ways he helped kill Brian Xavier. In the end, he ends up kills himself and Sharon, leaving Charles and his own son Kane as orphans. The two brothers beforehand fought anyway, but their relationship becomes even more and more strained over the years. Following in his father's footsteps, Charles goes to a number of universities, both in America and in England, to receive a number of doctorates in many fields of science. And during this time he meets a Scottish lady called Moira, who he falls desperately in love with, and they get engaged, and they are planning their futures together. Unfortunately, around this time he gets drafted back to America to join the US Army in the fight with Korea, and Charles goes and he fights in the war. During this period, Moira actually writes him a letter and tells him that, unfortunately, even though she loves him dearly, she is unable to marry him, and she breaks off the engagement. This has a terrible effect on Charles Xavier, to which he, as soon as he leaves the army, he starts travelling the world as an adventurer, going to different parts of the world. One of the first places he does go to is Cairo in Europe, in Egypt, where he meets a young street thief called Aurora Monroe, who is working for a shady crime leader called the Shadow King, and Charles uses his influence, his powers of telekinesis, being telepath, to free Aurora from the Shadow King's control. The next place where he goes is going to a charity that helps people that were in the Holocaust, and this is where he meets a Holocaust survivor who at this time is going by the name of Magnus. Now, Charles and Magnus start up a friendship. It later becomes clear that he's known as Eric Lencher, and they begin working together as Charles discovers that Magnus has the power to control metals, magnesium. So they begin working with each other wanting to create a better place for mutants to be able to live in the world. Unfortunately, it becomes very clear quite quickly that both men have quite different ideologies in respect of how they want the world to see mutants. Charles wishes to have the world see mutants as equal and be able to live side by side in this world that they all live in. So when Charles leaves and returns back to Westchester, New York, he starts searching for mutants that he may be able to start training. This is where he starts the beginnings of the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters with his first students, which he picks up along the way, being Scott Summers, Cyclops, Hank McCoy, Beast, Warren Worthington III as Angel, and Bobby Drake as Iceman, and of course Jean Grey as Marvel Girl. Now, obviously, over the first few years of the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, there was a few missions that they went on, mainly being the meeting for the first time of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and coming up against characters like Kane Marco, now going under the name of the Juggernaut. Now, like I say, over the years there's a number of missions. Unfortunately, one mission goes quite badly wrong, and Cyclops is the only member of the X-Men that are left after all the rest of them disappear. This is where Charles Xavier has to go off and try and find a new load of X-Men, going back to Aurora Monroe, going under the name of Storm, a gentleman called Logan, going under the name of Wolverine, Kurt Wagner, going by the name of Nightcrawler, then you had Colossus, who is Peter something or other, I can't remember his surname, and then a few other members of the team. And their first mission is to go and find out what happens to the original X-Men and try and get them back, which they are able to do, and they then obviously things start. Obviously, there's these two different teams of the X-Men, so it all kind of starts to blend all together. Other things that you need to know is Charles Xavier has seemingly died an awful lot of times in the comics. He has a evil twin sister. Him and Magneto have had their personalities absorbed into one being, and Charles and Magneto have had to fight this hybrid of themselves. He has got a number of children throughout the comics. He has Legion, who is a child that he has with Moira McTaggart. In alternative futures, he has children with Mystique, and who else do he have children with? Mystique and Mystique. We know that he has in the past been turned evil for a short period of time, and having to be made to go good again by members of the X-Men. One of the most notable stories of recent times is that after the House of M event, I believe, Charles Xavier is killed by Cyclops, Scott Summers, and in the aftermath, the Red Skull, the leader of Hydra, cuts off the top of Charles Xavier's head and takes out his brain and keeps it alive so he can start manipulating the world to start being having Hydra as being in charge. Like I say, other things that have there is obviously the very long and very prolonged relationship that he has with his stepbrother Kane Marco, who, like I said earlier on, becomes the Juggernaut. Every couple of years or so, that relationship rears its head again, and there is a little bit of complication that needs to be sorted out via the X-Men for Charles Xavier. Another relationship that is not exactly directly connected to Charles Xavier, but is the relationship between Wolverine and his archenemy Sabretooth, that Charles tries to get to the bottom of, because he believes that it is an important part of what happened to both of these characters, so he tries to figure that out. He is, of course, in the eyes of nearly all of his X-Men, a second father figure for them. He has great love and feelings for all of his X-Men. It has been hinted at occasionally that there is a potential love interest that Charles has in the character of Jean Grey, which is quite clearly not replicated. Of course, Charles is very aware of the loving relationship between Scott and Jean, but he's also aware of the relationship that Wolverine occasionally and wants to have with Jean also. Hank is, of course, like I said, a equally very smart individual out of the X-Men, and him and Charles in many ways are very equal in their intelligence, being the fact that Hank McCoy is a very intelligent individual, especially in the sciences, like Charles, and they often bounce ideas off one another so they can solve difficulties in a science laboratory. Like I say, he's always been one of these individuals that cares very much about his students. He often tries to assist his X-Men from far away, as they're obviously fighting in the battlefield, be it against Magneto, or is it by William Stryker, or whoever it may be, or even the Sentinels. Charles will be most likely on the Quinjet or in the X-Mansion, giving them direction. But yes, if there is anything else that you would like to know about Charles Xavier, please, I would either you can message me, and if I know the answer, I will try and answer it back to you. Or the other thing that I could suggest you do what I did, which is go onto Wikipedia and look at stuff on there for information, and also go and talk to people that know about comic books. Unfortunately, I like I've said many times before, I don't read comic books myself, but I just enjoy the the films and the TV shows that I used to watch as a child. But, so like I said, I've spoken about the comic book counterpart for Charles Xavier, the original Charles Xavier. But now I'm going to talk about the what I do know about the movies and the TV shows. So this is Charles Xavier. He is obviously the head teacher of the Xavier School for the Gifted Youngsters that are secretly mutants, and he has he wants all of his students who have abilities to be trained and know how to use their powers safely, and in the knowledge that if they need to use their powers, that they can use their powers, and that they are safe to do so. Obviously, one of the more difficult students that he had to deal with was, of course, Scott Summers, as he cannot open his eyes without blasting out a beam of pure energy that, if hits people or hits a building, will destroy it straight away. So obviously Charles had to create some kind of visor for him to use, so he would keep everyone else around Scott safe. Obviously, another person that he's had to assist with their mutant powers is, of course, Hank McCoy, who started off life as an ordinary human being-looking person, and human being person. Who speaks like that? And after an experiment goes wrong, he gets turned blue and has blue fur all over his body, and obviously that makes it a lot more obvious that he is a mutant. But fortunately enough, it does not seem to affect his mental capacity a lot of the time. There has been occasional stories throughout history that Hank McCoy has suffered slight mental difficulties during a further mutation that happens. But like I say, most of the time, obviously, Warren Worthington, he obviously has limitations down to the fact that he has massive angel wings on his back, so if he does not want people to know that he is a mutant, he obviously has to have adapted clothes that can be a little bit more difficult. Characters like Iceman, who when he is using his powers as a superhero, he creates himself completely in ice, so in other ways that he looks completely normal and you wouldn't know any different. It's very much a bit like Colossus, like I spoke to you earlier on, who can completely turn himself into metal, and so that's very interesting. Wolverine, like earlier on, Wolverine is one of the more difficult characters that I believe Charles Xavier has had to come up against, simply down to the fact that originally Charles's mutation is that he has enhanced senses, a super strength, and he has a healing factor, and he also has bone claws, which 3 of them come out of between his knuckles on each hand. At some point throughout his history, Wolverine was a part of a secret government agency that covered his entire skeleton with the hardest metal in the Marvel universe, which is adamantium, and that has completely covered his entire body, and it's also his claws. So he has completely lost all memories of his life beforehand. Over the time, Charles has tried to assist him in getting information back. But yes, like I said, that's just a little bit of history that I know about the characters that Charles interacts with. Like I say, Charles is very much involved in all of the characters that are involved in the X-Men. He's very much involved in their development and their creating and understanding of their powers. Well, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope it's been beneficial for you. I hope that if this is the first time you've had a bit more interest in about Professor X, I hope this is giving you the interest to go off and try and find a little bit more out about him. Like I said, I hope that you have a wonderful week. If you like, you can leave a comment or a subscribe down below. You can email me on the email that's connected to this onto this YouTube channel. If you like, you can leave a like. You can join my Patreon and assist me with the videos. And I hope you have like I said, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.